Hello, family. Welcome to Stories with Ma Desi. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The air in the real estate office was crisp with fresh linen scent and ambition, gleaming marble floors, minimalist white furniture, and a glass wall that framed the city like a postcard. Henry walked in first, tall and assured, dressed in a charcoal suit that hugged his frame with tailored precision. His wristwatch, a limited edition Swiss masterpiece, glinted under the light as he adjusted his cuff. Right behind him was Sheila, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She looked younger than she was, deliberately so. Her bright red dress clung to her hourglass figure like it was stitched for seduction. Clutching Henry's arm, she surveyed the space with glossy-eyed curiosity. "Henry," she purred, "I want a house that says we've arrived. Something modern, clean, maybe with marble countertops. In space, lots of it." He nodded casually, a smug grin playing on his lips. "Of course. We're not here to settle. We're here to start over, remember." They moved toward the seating area, where a young receptionist greeted them with a polite smile and handed Henry a clipboard. "An agent will be with you shortly," she said. Sheila crossed her legs and flipped through a glossy brochure, her tone half playful. "Maybe we should get married after we buy the house. Start a family in a place that's truly ours." Henry chuckled, placing his palm on her knee. "Let's buy the house first, then we'll talk about weddings and baby rooms." He glanced down at his phone, ignoring the brief flicker of guilt that crossed his features when he saw a reminder of his upcoming divorce hearing, the one he hadn't even told Sheila about. In that moment, a door across the lobby creaked open. The agent stepped in, clipboard in hand, walking with slow poise. "Mr. Henry," she called. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Henry didn't look up until she stepped closer. "Hello. I'll be helping you with your property search today. My name is Goodness." Henry looked up from his phone, and for a split second, the world stopped. Her voice was hauntingly familiar. But he couldn't quite place it. He squinted. But the woman before him held her expression steady, her face unreadable. "Goodness," he repeated. "That's a unique name." She smiled just slightly. "Yes, one you don't easily forget." Goodness adjusted the hem of her blazer as she walked ahead of the couple, her heels tapping rhythmically on the tiled floor like a war drum only she could hear. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind, the day she'd finally face him again. But she never imagined it would happen like this, so abruptly, with no warning. She hadn't changed much physically since the last time Henry saw her, but the softness in her eyes had been replaced with steel. She extended her hand toward him with professional calm. "We'll start with a few upscale listings within your budget," she said coolly, not betraying a hint of emotion. Sheila gave her a once-over and leaned into Henry's ear. "She's pretty, in a plain sort of way," she whispered, smiling smugly. Henry only nodded, trying to shake off the peculiar itch of familiarity in his gut. But Goodness, beneath the surface, was struggling to stay composed, biting down the hurricane of betrayal that once shattered her world. As they exited the lobby into the car park, Goodness pulled out her clipboard. "The first house is about 15 minutes away. I've arranged a private showing," she explained. Henry walked behind her, distracted, his eyes occasionally drifting to her profile. There was something about the curve of her jaw, the cadence of her voice. It stirred an uncomfortable déjà vu. Sheila, meanwhile, was already talking about interior design, oblivious. "I want velvet curtains, maybe a chandelier in the dining area." "Not those cheap ones," she said, flipping through images on her phone. "We'll see what suits the structure," Goodness responded, her tone even but firm. She didn't care for the woman's rude tone, but she wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing that. As they got into separate cars, Goodness sat behind the wheel of her modest gray SUV, her hands momentarily trembling on the steering. She stared into the rearview mirror, whispering to herself, "You asked for strength. Now walk in it." And with that, she pulled out of the lot, leading the man who once tore her heart apart and his new muse into the unknown. The drive was quiet but tense. Henry's car trailed just behind Goodness's, But inside the SUV, Sheila leaned back, talking on and on about color palettes, wall art, and imported bathtubs. Henry wasn't listening. Instead, he stared ahead, his eyes narrowing on the car in front of them. "What did she say her name was again?" he asked. "Goodness. Weird, right?" Sheila replied while applying fresh lip gloss. "Sounds like a church girl name. You think she's one of those overly righteous types?" Henry chuckled without humor. The way she had introduced herself, it wasn't the name that disturbed him. It was the way she said it, as though daring him to remember something he had tried hard to forget. He shook his head. "Probably just a coincidence," he muttered. But deep down, his chest felt tight, as if the air was turning thick with ghosts. When they finally arrived at the first property, a 2-story modern-style house tucked away in an elite, gated neighborhood, Goodness was already unlocking the door. "Please go in," she gestured. The interior was pristine, the scent of lavender and polished pine lingering in the air. Sheila gasped at the spiral staircase. "This is stunning," she said, her heels clacking as she explored. Henry wandered slowly, his hand brushing the granite kitchen counter. Goodness stood by the door, arms folded, watching silently. "Have I met you before?" Henry asked suddenly, turning to face her. Her heartbeat skipped, but her expression didn't flinch. "Many clients ask that," she replied coolly. "Perhaps we passed at a conference or viewed another property." Henry nodded slowly, unconvinced. She turned slightly and added, "I try to forget certain faces. Makes the job easier." The jab was subtle, but it hit like a slap. Henry blinked, sensing a coldness in her he couldn't explain. Meanwhile, Sheila continued admiring the upstairs guest rooms, unaware that the house they were in was not the only thing layered with secrets. As Goodness closed the door behind them, the wind outside seemed to whisper a warning that none of them were ready to hear. The second house on the list was older but recently renovated, its foundation strong, its spirit restless. As Goodness unlocked the door, a strange calm fell over her. The scent of lemon polish triggered something visceral. This place reminded her too much of what she once dreamed of having with Henry. Not in design, but in feeling, a home built on partnership and laughter, not secrets and second chances. "This one is spacious," she explained. 5 bedrooms, 2 balconies, a wine cellar, and a converted studio downstairs. Sheila practically squealed. "A wine cellar? Oh, Henry, this could be perfect for my yoga room and your whiskey tastings." Henry smirked but said little, instead gazing around with a quiet weight on his shoulders. The house was beautiful, but something about the energy unsettled him. The walls seemed to whisper things he couldn't decipher. Meanwhile, Goodness walked quietly behind them, fingers brushing the edge of the banister, remembering how she once helped pick wallpaper for a house she never got to live in. As they reached the master bedroom, Sheila twirled, arms stretched wide. "This will be our sanctuary," she said. "Can you imagine us waking up to that view?" She pointed to the wide windows overlooking a quiet lake. Henry walked in after her, but his feet hesitated at the doorway. For some inexplicable reason, his eyes darted to the wall near the headboard. He could almost swear he remembered Goodness sketching a bedroom just like this in one of her notebooks years ago. He shook the thought off quickly. "It's nice," he said finally. Goodness leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Bedrooms carry stories," she said thoughtfully. "Some hold peace, some don't." Sheila turned to her with a curious laugh. "Well, I want one that holds good dreams. And no history, please." Goodness gave a thin smile. "You'd be surprised how often the past lives in the walls, waiting." Her words lingered longer than they should have. Henry stared at her, his unease growing. As they exited the room, he looked back once more. The bedroom hadn't spoken, but somehow it had screamed. And for the first time in a long while, Henry began to wonder if the past he tried to bury was digging its way back to the surface. The office was winding down for the evening. Agents were packing up their folders, the receptionist was logging out, and the once busy halls now hummed with faint silence. Goodness remained seated at her desk, her fingers frozen above her keyboard, her gaze locked on a contract she had rewritten 3 times. Joseph, her colleague and the branch's operations manager, stepped in with 2 paper cups. "You look like your thoughts are arguing with each other," he said softly, placing a cup beside her. She managed a weak smile. It's just been a long day. He leaned on the edge of her desk, his eyes studying her. That man today, the tall one with the mistress. You've been off since they walked in. What is it, G? She exhaled slowly, the air catching in her throat. That man is Henry, my ex-husband. Joseph froze, his brows knitting together in disbelief. Wait, that's the Henry? Goodness nodded slowly. The one I built a future with, the one I bled for, and the one who left me when I lost our baby. The words hung heavy between them like storm clouds waiting to break. Joseph sat down, his voice gentler. You never told me everything. I knew you went through a divorce, but not like this. Goodness rubbed her temples. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the timing. I miscarried alone in the hospital while he was flying to Zanzibar with Sheila. I didn't even get a goodbye, just silence and shame. Her voice cracked but didn't fall apart. Joseph's hands tightened around his cup. And now you're showing them homes. She nodded. It's poetic, isn't it? He's out shopping for a new life. But I'm the one showing him what home really looks like. Joseph leaned forward. You don't have to do this alone, G. Let me be your eyes while you find your footing again. She looked at him, gratitude swimming in her eyes. I'm not trying to get revenge, she whispered, but I want to reclaim something I lost, something he tried to erase. Joseph nodded. Then let's do this right. No drama, just precision. As they sipped their coffee, steam rising like ghosts from the past, the late-night quiet became a canvas for the strategy that was beginning to form. Inside the third house on the list, a sprawling Mediterranean-style property tucked into a secluded corner of the hills, the mood shifted. The house was quiet, elegant, and drenched in golden afternoon light. Yet beneath the surface, tension stirred like smoke. Henry and Sheila walked into the master suite and began debating the price. It's too steep, Sheila said, folding her arms. We can find something better for less. This isn't even new construction. Henry sighed. You said you wanted privacy, a view in space. This checks all those boxes. Sheila turned toward Goodness. Why is this one priced higher than the others? It's not even furnished. Goodness maintained her poise, tapping the contract folder lightly. The value lies in the land and architecture. Renovations here were done with imported materials. And unlike others, this property is free of encumbrances. Henry raised a brow. So you're saying this is a clean slate? She looked him dead in the eyes. Exactly that. A clean slate for whoever truly deserves one. Sheila scoffed, tossing her long braids over her shoulder. Honestly, sometimes it's like these agents think they know better than us. Henry gave a dry chuckle but didn't respond. His attention was back on the details, fingers tracing the edge of the fireplace, lost in thought. Goodness stepped outside to take a call, and Joseph met her there. They're arguing already, he asked. She gave a tiny nod. She wants the price slashed. He wants the ego boost of buying at full price. Joseph smirked, classic imbalance. As Goodness returned inside, she overheard Sheila say something that made her stomach turn. Some wives don't know how to keep a man motivated. They just sit around draining his energy. Henry, you're thriving now. Aren't you glad you moved on? Goodness set her folder down with careful grace. I'll give you two a few minutes to discuss. When you're ready, we'll go over the terms. Her tone was calm, but Joseph, watching from the foyer, knew she was suppressing fire. He took out his phone and discreetly began recording, capturing Sheila's demeaning tone and Henry's silence. Not for gossip, but for proof, because sometimes justice doesn't shout, it documents. And the woman once silenced was now preparing her voice for a different kind of reckoning. Back at the office, Goodness sat at her desk, expression focused, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with a precision sharpened by grief and growth. She was editing the final contract for the property Sheila and Henry had finally agreed upon. But this version carried a legal clause that wasn't present in the standard template. It was subtle, almost invisible, unless you knew what to look for. A line buried halfway through the document. In the event that a moral breach involving either party leads to conflict before title transfer, the seller reserves the right to revoke the agreement with full legal authority. Joseph stood by her side, reading over her shoulder. You sure this'll hold up? He asked quietly. Completely, Goodness replied. I had a lawyer revise the wording 2 months ago when I decided to come back into the field. Joseph gave a low whistle. You've been planning this. She looked at him without flinching. No. I've been preparing for a moment like this. Not revenge, just accountability. Later that afternoon, Henry arrived alone to finalize paperwork. Sheila had opted out of attending, claiming a nail appointment, but truthfully, she was growing bored with the whole affair. Henry flipped casually through the documents as Goodness walked him through the process. So just here, and here, she said, pointing to the signature lines. I've highlighted all the important clauses. He didn't bother reading them. Arrogance had long ago taught him that power was in delegation. I trust you, he said, signing both pages quickly. And it's funny. I feel like I've trusted you before, he added with a strange softness. Goodness's lips curved, but her eyes remained hollow. Trust can be expensive when given blindly. He looked at her curiously, but said nothing more. As he left, Joseph stepped out of the copy room and locked eyes with her. It's done, she whispered. He signed the trap. And somewhere in the depths of her chest, the weight of lost years gave way, not to vengeance, but to clarity. The past no longer had the power to silence her. She was writing a new ending on her terms. Henry's call came late in the afternoon, just as Goodness was reviewing another contract. His voice on the phone was strangely warm, almost nostalgic. We were thinking of taking you to dinner. A small thank you for your professionalism, he said. Before she could politely decline, he added, Sheila insisted. She thinks highly of you. That last sentence twisted something in her gut. After a pause, she replied, Where and what time? They met at a high-end rooftop restaurant that overlooked the glittering skyline. Goodness arrived in a simple navy dress, her afro pulled back neatly, contrast to Sheila's shimmering, sequined outfit and heels that seemed more suited for a red carpet. Henry stood as she approached. You look elegant, he said, slightly caught off guard. Thank you, she replied, sliding into her seat as Sheila poured wine into all 3 glasses. To new beginnings, Sheila toasted, raising her glass. Goodness clinked hers gently. And to truth. It always finds its way. As dinner unfolded, the conversation teetered between forced compliments and subtle jabs. Sheila launched into a story about how Henry's ex-wife had no ambition and how refreshing it was to be with a man who was finally becoming his full self. She was the kind of woman who never understood vision, Sheila said casually, slicing her steak. All she ever did was drain him with her emotional mess. Goodness's grip on her fork tightened, but her voice remained soft. It's difficult to understand someone's emotional depth when you're only shown the edited version of their life. Henry cleared his throat, sensing tension, but choosing silence. What do you mean? Sheila asked, eyes narrowed. Just that some stories are only told from the lens of survival, not from truth. Goodness replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Henry looked away, suddenly more interested in his food. Goodness excused herself shortly after, her chest burning, not from the wine, but from the memory of how small she had once felt under the weight of their betrayal. Joseph had warned her that being near them might reopen wounds. But she now realized something deeper. She no longer bled. She wasn't there to impress them. She was there to witness their illusion of a future being built on lies. The following morning, Sheila walked into the agency unexpectedly, her sunglasses perched high on her forehead and an edge of irritation in her tone. I just remembered something, she said as Goodness looked up from her desk. You look oddly familiar. Are you sure we've never met? Goodness stood calmly, straightening a file. I've worked in real estate for years. Faces blur together. Sheila tilted her head. You weren't on social media much, were you? That's probably why. Henry arrived moments later, offering a half-hearted apology for Sheila's curiosity. Don't mind her, he said, chuckling. She watches too many suspense dramas. Goodness didn't flinch. Well, if it helps ease the suspense, I can take you both to view one more property. It's off-market, private listing. Sheila's face lit up instantly. Now that's what I want to hear. Henry glanced at Goodness for a beat too long before nodding. Lead the way. They drove across town in silence, the sun casting long shadows on the road. Goodness led them to a spacious colonial-style home nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The yard was immaculate, the air heavy with the scent of fresh-cut grass. As she unlocked the front door, Henry felt a strange unease crawl up his spine. The foyer was strikingly familiar. The curve of the staircase, the custom archway, the subtle detail in the ceiling trim, it tugged at something buried in his memory. "This place feels odd," he muttered. Sheila, on the other hand, was enchanted. "It's perfect. Even the hallway smells expensive." They wandered through the rooms while Goodness silently observed. In the study, Henry paused. There was a fireplace here, identical to one he'd once designed with someone else. "Did you say this house is a private listing?" he asked. "Yes," Goodness replied. "It once belonged to a couple with big dreams. They poured their hearts into it. But dreams can burn when trust is betrayed." Henry's head snapped toward her. Her words hit too close. "You always speak in riddles," he said, trying to laugh. "Not riddles," she answered smoothly. "Truths delivered quietly, so only those with a past can hear them." The walls around them, once neutral and harmless, suddenly felt like mirrors, and Henry wasn't sure he liked what he saw. As they entered the master bedroom, a palpable silence filled the space. The room was spacious, with large bay windows that opened to a garden bathed in early sunlight. Goodness stood by the window, while Sheila gushed about the closet space. But Henry lingered in the doorway, staring. Something about the room was achingly familiar, the slant of the ceiling, the custom lighting fixture, the arched doorway that led to the bathroom. He had been here before. Not exactly here, but in the blueprint of this place. It was the dream home he and Goodness had once sketched together on lazy Sunday mornings. He swallowed hard. "Who built this?" he asked quietly. Goodness turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "People who believed in beginnings. People who didn't realize that betrayal has a way of burning foundations." His heart gave a strange lurch. "Have you been in real estate long?" he asked, now genuinely curious. "Long enough to recognize when people pretend new love can erase old guilt." Downstairs, Sheila was on the phone, arranging a housewarming party that hadn't even been scheduled. "We'll do a full brunch setup," she chirped. "Champagne fountains, maybe a fire pit in the backyard. Henry's paying." Her voice drifted up the staircase, breaking the charged quiet upstairs. Goodness gestured toward the bedroom window. "You'll get a lot of light in this room. And if you listen closely, even the silence will speak." Henry's eyes lingered on her. "There's something about you I can't put my finger on," he confessed. "You remind me of something I lost." She walked past him slowly, almost brushing shoulders. "Then maybe this home will help you remember what not to lose again." As they exited the house, Sheila was still chatting away, oblivious to the silent storm Henry now carried inside him. For Goodness, the moment wasn't just about showing them a house. It was about reclaiming the space where her dignity had once collapsed, and watching the very man who caused it walk unknowingly through its ruins. That evening, after returning to the office, Goodness found herself sitting in the staff lounge, then mechanically stirring a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking. The memory hit without warning, a sharp pang buried beneath layers of composure. It was her birthday 2 years ago. She had spent the day preparing a special dinner, wearing a soft pink dress Henry had once complimented. She waited until midnight with the candles burning low, her phone silent. At 12:07 a.m., he texted, caught up in meetings. "Sleep well." But she had already seen photos, Henry on a beach abroad, arms around Sheila, both laughing under string lights. That night, she didn't cry. She simply packed her dinner into the fridge, blew out the candles, and told herself maybe love was supposed to hurt sometimes. But the ache never left, not until now. Joseph entered quietly, sensing the heaviness in her. "Rough day?" he asked, sliding beside her on the sofa. Goodness didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "Do you know he forgot my birthday 2 years in a row? The last time, I was pregnant. I had planned to tell him after dessert." Joseph's face softened. "You never told me you were pregnant." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I miscarried 2 days later. He never knew. Or if he did, he never asked." There was a silence that wrapped around them like a wool blanket. "You're not weak for remembering," Joseph said. "You're human, but don't let the past steal your voice now." She turned to him, tears brimming but unshed. "I'm not trying to be brave. I'm just tired of being erased." He reached for her hand gently. "Then let's make sure you're never forgotten again." That promise, though simple, carried weight. Because sometimes healing begins not with forgetting the pain, but with being witnessed in it. The storm the night she left had been almost cinematic, thunder rolling like angry drums across the sky, its rain slicing down the windows like sobs she wouldn't let herself cry. Goodness moved silently through their apartment, gathering pieces of herself with every folded blouse and packed shoe. Her suitcases sat by the door, mute witnesses to a war she had lost without ever being invited to fight. She glanced once at the framed photo on the hallway wall, Henry kissing her cheek at their anniversary dinner. Her fingers hovered over it, then dropped. She didn't take it down. She left it like a gravestone. In the kitchen, she placed a letter, 3 pages, handwritten and raw. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was honest, and she knew, deep down, he would never read it. But she had to write it anyway. At 3:17 a.m., she stepped out into the rain with her luggage, the streets washed clean, but her heart soaked in grief. No one came after her, no headlights, no apologies. Just the sound of her own footsteps and the certainty that she could never go back. She moved into a small serviced flat across town the next day. She found solace in silence, in new morning routines, in not checking her phone every hour hoping for a message that would never come. That first month she barely spoke, but she found a notebook and began writing down her thoughts, one line at a time. "I don't need closure," one entry read. "I need peace." It was there, in that tiny apartment, that she discovered her love for real estate. Helping people find homes felt like building security for others when she had lost her own. She took courses, got certified, and slowly rose through the ranks. She built herself back brick by emotional brick, no longer waiting for someone to rescue her. Now, 2 years later, standing in the same room with Henry and his mistress, she wasn't the broken woman who left in the rain. She was the woman who learned how to sell storms and turn the rubble into profit. The morning was quiet, the air thick with the kind of stillness that usually preceded a revelation. Joseph sat at Goodness's desk, flipping through a folder she had left behind during an urgent showing. Among invoices and permits, something slipped out, a faded photo, slightly creased at the corners. He picked it up gently. It was a wedding portrait. Goodness in ivory satin, her eyes glowing, Henry beside her, youthful and unaware of the destruction he would one day cause. Joseph stared at the photo for a long moment, his thumb brushing across her smile. He wasn't angry, he was heartbroken. Not for himself, but for her. She had carried so much so silently. When Goodness returned, she froze at the sight of the picture in his hand. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said softly. Joseph stood, placing it back into the folder with reverence. "Maybe not, but I'm glad I did." She sat down slowly, her fingers gripping the armrest. "I didn't hide it to deceive anyone. I didn't want to be seen as the woman who got left." Joseph leaned forward. "You're not the woman who got left, G. You're the woman who survived betrayal and turned it into a business deal." She blinked, emotions swelling in her throat. "You think I'm strong," he nodded. "I know you are. But you don't have to do this alone." She looked away. "I'm not sure I know how to let someone help me anymore." Joseph reached across the desk, gently placing his hand over hers. "You don't have to decide that today. But if you ever feel like stepping out from behind the agent, I'll be waiting to meet the woman underneath." His voice was tender but full of truth. And for the first time in a long time, Goodness didn't feel like she was walking through fire alone. Joseph wasn't trying to fix her. He was simply standing beside her. And sometimes that's all a broken heart really needs to begin again. The bank confirmation came through just after noon. Henry's payment for the property was successful. Several zeros transferred with ease, as if money could buy freedom from the past. Goodness stared at the transaction notice on her screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before finally forwarding the receipt to her legal consultant. Joseph entered moments later, holding a manila envelope filled with closing documents. "It's time," he said quietly. Goodness nodded, but there was a tightness in her chest she hadn't prepared for. "Let's hold off on the final stamp," she said. Joseph arched a brow. "Stalling?" She nodded. "Not quite. Just making sure every step is airtight." Sheila has started asking too many questions. We can't afford a single crack in the structure. Joseph leaned on the table, arms crossed. Do you want this to end in silence or spectacle? Goodness looked up, her voice firm. I want it to end in truth. Let the consequences decide the volume. Meanwhile, Sheila had grown increasingly restless. Her texts to Henry had become frequent and irritated. I don't like how that woman looks at you. Why haven't we closed this deal already? Henry brushed her off, assuring her it was just bureaucracy. But truthfully, he had begun feeling disoriented, unsettled by how often Goodness's eyes felt familiar, how her words left aftershocks in his chest. That evening, Henry visited the agency alone to sign final revisions. He sat across from Goodness in the glass conference room, pen in hand. So this is it? He asked, attempting levity. This home, this step forward, it's finally ours. Goodness folded her hands. Ownership is more than possession. It's responsibility. Be sure you're buying something you're prepared to take care of. He stared at her. You speak like someone who's been broken by responsibility. She didn't blink. Or by those who abandon it. As she handed him the pen, Joseph entered with notarized documents. Henry signed, oblivious to the clause that still sat buried in the middle section, shielded in legalese. He stood, extended his hand, and smiled. Thank you for everything. Goodness shook it slowly. You're welcome, Henry. His name leaving her lips visibly shook him. He paused, looked at her longer than necessary, then walked away, carrying more than just keys. He was now the owner of a home, and unknowingly of his own undoing. That night, Sheila's anxiety turned to obsession. She scrolled through Goodness's social media pages again, coming up nearly empty, only a few posts about real estate and 2 cryptic quotes about silence and survival. But something gnawed at her. Her instincts, often overshadowed by vanity, now screamed that something wasn't right. The next morning, while Henry was away at a meeting, Sheila arrived at the agency unannounced. She breezed past the receptionist, heels tapping a frustrated rhythm, and entered Goodness's empty office. The room was spotless, minimalist, but personal enough. On the far shelf stood a single photo in a sleek black frame. Sheila moved closer, expecting perhaps an award or childhood memory, but froze. The photo was torn down the center, but the half that remained was unmistakable. Henry, younger, dressed in the exact wedding tuxedo she had once complimented in an old photo he thought she'd never notice. Panic surged through her veins like fire. No, she whispered. No way. Goodness entered just as Sheila snatched the photo from the shelf. Their eyes met in a still, electric moment. Looking for something? Goodness asked, her tone calm as ever. Sheila straightened, mask cracking. Who are you? She demanded. Goodness walked slowly toward her, voice low. I'm the lesson you ignored when you stepped into a life that wasn't yours. Sheila scoffed, but her voice wavered. He said his ex-wife disappeared, that she didn't want him. Goodness tilted her head. No, Sheila, he told you what you wanted to hear. But disappearing is different from being discarded. I left, because staying would have destroyed what was left of me. Sheila's grip loosened, the photo dropping back to the desk like a final card in a doomed game. Does Henry know? She asked, almost pleading. Not yet, Goodness replied. But he's about to find out everything when the house he thinks he bought becomes a doorway into truth. Sheila staggered back, lips trembling. For once, her confidence wasn't enough to fill the room. As she left, visibly shaken, Goodness picked up the photo and placed it back on the shelf. She had waited patiently, planned quietly, and now the truth, long buried, was rising like morning light through stormy windows. Sheila didn't sleep that night. The image of that torn photograph haunted her like a ghost. She ransacked her phone for the contract Henry had emailed to her days before, finally finding the PDF buried in a string of forwarded messages. Heart pounding, she opened the document and scrolled through the pages, clauses, terms, tax references, until her breath caught. There it was, a legal line halfway down page 4. In the event of moral breach involving either party resulting in transaction conflict, the seller reserves right of revocation and full legal transfer. Sheila's fingers trembled. What does that even mean? She whispered. But the name under the seller's signature cleared any doubt. Goodness Ijeoma Henry, her full legal name boldly stamped and notarized. The truth slammed into her like cold water. Henry hadn't just bought a house, he had walked straight into his ex-wife's trap. With shaking hands, she forwarded the document to her personal lawyer, typing only 3 words. "Is this enforceable?" The reply came within hours. Legally valid. If signed knowingly, the seller retains right to revoke. This clause has teeth. That morning, Sheila marched into Henry's study, flinging her phone onto his desk. "Explain this," she snapped. Henry rubbed his temples, barely awake. "What's going on now?" She pointed furiously at the screen. "You signed a house over from your ex-wife. Her name's on everything. She owns you, Henry." He blinked, reading the line over and over. Goodness. That was goodness. His face drained of color. "I didn't even recognize her." Sheila laughed bitterly. "Well, she recognized you, and she's played you like a violin." He stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "Where are you going?" she demanded. He didn't answer. The realization cut deeper than embarrassment. It was exposure. The man who thought he could replace a life like a wardrobe change had just discovered that some doors, once closed, don't just stay shut. They lock, and the key was never his to begin with. As Henry rushed toward the agency, desperation mounting, Goodness stood calmly in her office, watching the morning sun rise through the glass. She knew he was coming. She was ready. The front doors of the agency flung open with a force that startled both clients and staff. Henry stormed in, his expression wild with disbelief and betrayal. The receptionist stood to intervene, but Joseph appeared from a nearby hallway, already stepping into Henry's path. "Where is she?" Henry barked. "You need to calm down," Joseph said firmly. "This is still a place of business." Henry's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Goodness, who stood just outside the showroom, clipboard in hand, her face unreadable. "You used me," he growled, walking toward her. She didn't move. "No, Henry," she replied calmly. "I simply watched you write your own fate and waited for you to sign it." A crowd began to gather, agents pretending to organize files, clients pretending to browse listings, all leaning in to witness the storm brewing in human form. Henry stepped into the center of the showroom, his voice rising. "You tricked me into buying a house just so you could humiliate me?" Goodness stepped forward, her voice controlled but cutting. "I gave you options. You chose the one built on silence because that's what you're best at, ignoring consequences." He jabbed a finger toward her. "You don't get to win like this. This isn't justice, it's revenge." She tilted her head. "You think I'm seeking revenge? If I wanted that, I would have sold you a house with termites and left a camera in every wall." A chuckle erupted from somewhere in the back. Henry's jaw tightened. "You're unbelievable." She took a single step closer. "No, Henry. I'm unforgettable. You just never bothered to look beyond yourself." Sheila suddenly appeared at the entrance, makeup smeared and desperation in her eyes. "Henry, stop. You're making it worse." But the damage had been done. Phones were recording. Clients were whispering. The respected businessman had just unraveled in front of strangers, and the woman he tried to erase had risen from the ashes, not with rage, but with power in her posture. Henry followed Goodness into a private glass office, slamming the door behind him. "How long have you been planning this?" he demanded, voice low and venomous. "Was this your plan all along, to trap me in some legal game?" Goodness sat calmly, folding her hands. "I didn't trap you. I offered you transparency. You never cared to read between the lines, just like you never cared to listen." Henry paced, his composure cracking like old marble. "You had no right to." "No right to what?" she cut in, her voice firmer now. "To sell my own property. To include a clause protecting myself from further manipulation? You should be familiar with hiding details. You mastered that in our marriage." He spun around, red-faced. "That clause is a violation." She pulled out a printed copy of the signed contract. "Then sue me," she said, sliding it across the table. "Let's test how much truth you're willing to put under oath." He stopped moving. His chest heaved, but the fury was giving way to something worse, humiliation. "You know how this makes me look?" he asked quietly. "Like a fool, like a man who got blindsided." She leaned forward. "No, Henry. It makes you look like a man who never paid attention until the silence screamed louder than your ego." He ran his hands over his face, the weight of it finally sinking in. I thought I thought you were gone for good." Her eyes softened just slightly. "I was, but healing sometimes walks back into the room it once bled in, not to stay, but to show it no longer hurts." He collapsed into the chair opposite her, the air knocked out of him. "And now?" he asked. "What happens now?" Goodness stood, collected the documents, and walked to the door. "Now, you go back to your life. But this house, it's mine to reclaim." She opened the door, pausing only to say, "Next time you sign your future away, read the fine print." As she left, Henry sat motionless, surrounded by the ruins of a power he thought he still held, and the echo of a woman who had finally reclaimed hers. Later that week, the conference room at the agency held a private legal meeting between Goodness, Joseph, and their attorney. Spread across the polished table were pages of the signed contract, now heavily annotated and tabbed. At the center was the clause that changed everything. Joseph tapped it twice for emphasis. "This clause is watertight," he said, looking toward their legal rep. "Section 4 confirms revocation rights tied directly to personal conflict caused by proven infidelity. Signed by the buyer, initialed twice." Goodness exhaled. "We can proceed then?" The attorney nodded. "Not only is the clause legal, it's enforceable. And considering the viral video, it would hold in court with public support on your side." Joseph leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. He built his entire empire on public image. He won't risk it getting uglier. Goodness gave a slow nod. "Then I'll file the revocation by Monday." For the first time, her voice didn't shake. It rang with certainty. Meanwhile, Henry sat in his office at Westgate Properties, nursing a glass of aged whiskey. His phone buzzed with article headlines and client cancellations, fallout from the very public spectacle. His PR team was in panic mode, urging him to release a statement. He ignored them. Instead, he stared at the copy of the contract Sheila had printed for him, reading the clause again and again as if the words would magically change. They didn't. It was there in black and white. If personal moral misconduct from the buyer compromises transaction peace, the seller retains full legal power to reverse property handover with cause. Henry whispered. "She buried this clause knowing I'd never see it." Then after a long pause, he added, "And I didn't even ask why she looked familiar." Shame curled in his gut like rot. Across town, Goodness stood at her apartment balcony, watching the evening fade into gold. The paper she held in her hand, the revocation notice, was her closure, not a weapon. She didn't want to ruin Henry. She just wanted him to understand what it meant to lose something real. And now, with truth on her side and law behind her, she was ready to give him that lesson, sealed, signed, and delivered. The video spread like wildfire. Someone in the showroom, an unnoticed client, or perhaps a curious staff member, had captured every moment of Henry's outburst. By midday, it was trending on multiple platforms. The caption was damning. "Wealthy businessman unknowingly buys house from ex-wife, breaks down when truth hits." Viewers devoured the drama, but what lingered most was Goodness's poise in contrast to Henry's unraveling. News outlets picked it up within hours. Real estate blogs hailed her as the woman who sold her past with profit, while lifestyle influencers turned her quotes into digital posters. At first, Henry tried to do damage control. He issued a statement about miscommunication in contract language and personal history colliding with professional dealings. But it only fueled the fire. Commenters tore him apart. "You didn't read your own contract. That's on you. Bet you read Sheila's messages clearer than those documents." Back at the agency, business soared. Goodness didn't gloat. She merely continued her work with the same grace she always had. Yet she couldn't deny the shift in atmosphere. Clients now looked at her with admiration, not just professionalism. Some even came just to meet her, to shake the hand of the woman who rewrote her own ending. Joseph leaned against her office door one afternoon, holding his phone. "You're trending again. Want to read the comments?" She chuckled softly, placing a pen between her fingers. "Only if one of them offers me coffee." But there was something else, a subtle heaviness behind her smile. "Does it ever bother you," she asked, "that people know now?" Joseph walked in, pulled a chair beside her, and replied, "It only bothers me that they didn't know before what you were made of." She looked at him, deeply moved. "I didn't do it to embarrass him," she said. "I just didn't want to be invisible anymore." Joseph nodded. And now, you're unforgettable. Across the city, Henry sat in his office, blinds drawn, his phone face down, and his world significantly smaller. Not because of the internet, but because he'd been publicly reminded of what real strength looked like, and that he'd once had it within reach. The first message came through the agency's general email. It was short, but sincere. Thank you for showing us it's possible to walk away with dignity. I left my abusive marriage today. You gave me that strength. Goodness reread the note 3 times, her eyes stinging. She hadn't expected this. She had prepared for scrutiny, for gossip, but not this quiet wave of solidarity. Within days, more came. Messages from women across the country, some sharing brief stories, others pouring out paragraphs about betrayal, healing, and the weight of staying silent for too long. One particularly long email came from a woman named Isokin. I saw your video while sitting in my car, deciding whether to go back home to a husband who tells me I'm nothing without him. But watching you stand so calm while he raged, it made me believe I don't have to scream to be strong. Goodness sat alone in her apartment, reading each message like scripture. She printed some out, pinning them on a corkboard by her window. They were reminders, not of revenge, but of ripple effects. Joseph joined her that evening, holding a brown envelope with legal paperwork. You good? He asked, noticing her quiet mood. She nodded slowly. I never thought silence could echo this far. He looked at the pinned letters, then at her. You didn't just sell him a house. You handed people a mirror, and they saw themselves brave for the first time. She smiled through the tears. Then maybe it was worth the storm. Joseph stepped closer, offering her the envelope. Revocation is finalized. The house is officially back in your name. She didn't flinch. Let's make it something more than bricks and rooms, she whispered. Let it mean something. Joseph's eyes lit up. Then let's turn it into a space for others like you. Like them, she nodded, a home for healing. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman who lost everything. She felt like a woman who'd been entrusted with something far more valuable. Purpose. It was a cloudy Thursday when the unexpected knock came at her door. She opened it slowly, half expecting a client or Joseph, but there he was. Henry, older than he looked days ago. Tired in a way that no luxury watch or custom suit could mask. He stood silently for a moment, as if unsure if he should speak or kneel. I didn't come to fight, he finally said. Then speak, Goodness replied, stepping aside. He entered quietly, gazing around the small but warm apartment filled with books, plants, and quiet strength. You changed, he said, almost in awe. No, she corrected. I returned to myself. You only ever knew the version of me you wanted to see. He sighed, sitting on the edge of the couch. I lost more than a house. She folded her arms. You lost a home. That's different. He looked up, regret shadowing his eyes. Why didn't you scream, curse me, humiliate me like I deserved? She walked to the window, watching the city breathe beneath the clouds. Because healing isn't a performance, it's a choice. And I chose not to bleed where you left me wounded. Silence stretched between them. Then he stood, taking a slow breath. Do you think we ever had a real chance? She turned to face him, this time without resentment. We did. But you mistook my love for endurance and expected me to carry both our truths. He nodded, eyes shining. I wish I had seen it then. Goodness gave a faint smile. We don't all get the chance to go back, but we do get to choose what we honor moving forward. He reached into his coat and placed the house keys on her table. It's yours in every sense. I won't fight it. She didn't pick them up. It always was. As he walked out the door, she didn't feel anger. She felt peace. Because some closures don't come with fireworks or vengeance. They come quietly, like an old wound finally choosing not to ache. Goodness opened her apartment door to the scent of mango body butter and a familiar face she hadn't seen in years. Annabelle? She whispered, the surprise blooming into a smile before she was enveloped in a tight hug. It's about time you let me visit, Annabelle said, pulling back to examine her. You look grown and glorious. Goodness laughed softly. I look tired, but I'll take your version. They sat in the living room, mugs of hibiscus tea steaming between them, the kind of warmth only shared history could ignite. Annabelle was her university roommate, the one who had seen her before the heartbreaks, before the rise and fall of marriage and ambition. I saw the video, Annabelle admitted gently. At first I was shocked, but then I just felt proud. Goodness's smile dimmed a little. It wasn't a victory, Annabelle, just survival with a backbone. Annabelle leaned forward. You've always had backbone. Even when we were broke students, sharing one packet of noodles for dinner, you were dreaming about real estate and emotional intelligence. Goodness chuckled. I thought if I could give people homes, maybe I could find one myself. There was a pause, a softening. You did, Annabelle said. It just didn't come with the man you thought it would. Goodness nodded, her voice gentle. This version of me, she's still learning not to apologize for existing in full light. Annabelle squeezed her hand. Then let her shine. As the night wore on, they talked about new plans, Goodness's dream of turning the reclaimed house into a space for women, and Annabelle's work in trauma therapy. We could collaborate, Annabelle said with a grin. You have the walls. I bring the healing. Goodness tilted her head. A house built on truth and restoration. I like that. For the first time in a long while, she felt not just seen, but supported by someone who had no stake in her pain. Someone who simply believed in the woman she'd become. The old keys no longer clinked with weight. They glowed with significance. Goodness stood at the edge of the front lawn, staring at the house Henry once tried to claim as his fresh start. It now belonged fully to her, not as a prize, but as proof. Proof that something broken could be rebuilt without begging. The shutters needed repainting, and the fence creaked, but she smiled. Let it show its scars, she murmured. Joseph joined her moments later, holding architectural sketches under his arm. Are you ready to strip it down? He asked. No, she replied. I'm ready to restore it. Together, they walked room to room, naming possibilities. A reading nook where betrayal once simmered, a wellness room where silence used to echo. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt expectant. They spent weeks renovating. Every inch they repaired was symbolic. The faded hardwood was sanded and varnished, the cracked tiles replaced with ones handpicked by Goodness herself. Even the old chandelier was taken down, not discarded, but polished and repurposed for a front hallway that would greet women who needed reminding that light always returns. One afternoon, as she painted the entry wall a soft, dusky rose, Joseph leaned against the doorway, watching her. This is the first time I've seen you relaxed, he said. She dipped the brush again. Because for the first time, I'm building something without fear of losing it. He walked over, paint-streaked blueprints in hand, and held up a new brass nameplate. The Haven House, for women who rose. Goodness blinked, her throat catching. You did this? Joseph smiled. We did. Your story deserves a door that opens for others. She pressed a paint-covered hand to her heart, speechless. The house no longer held shame. It now whispered redemption in every corner. Sheila's world began to fracture in quiet, humiliating ways. First came the revoked invitations. Events she once flaunted on social media were now behind closed doors. She was no longer welcome to enter. Then the endorsements paused. A makeup brand she partnered with released a statement about prioritizing integrity. But the final blow came from Henry himself. With his reputation still wounded, he distanced himself from her completely, citing the need to reassess personal priorities. Sheila found herself alone in a penthouse she couldn't afford, the silence mocking every high-pitched laugh she once used to mask insecurity. Her phone rang less, the likes dwindled. She'd built her image on someone else's downfall, and now that truth had flipped the script, the applause was gone. Desperate to reclaim control, Sheila attempted to reshape the narrative online, posting cryptic captions and nostalgic throwbacks. But the comments were unforgiving. You mocked a woman and bought her pain. Now you're paying rent in karma. Still looking for your next husband? She scrolled through them in disbelief, the smile in her selfies now visibly strained. Eventually, her content turned into motivational quotes, then quiet, polished silence. No more champagne posts, no more couple vacations. In one of her final videos before deactivating her page, she said, "Sometimes we lose not because we were wrong, but because we built our wins on the wounds of others." The irony wasn't lost on her. Across town, Goodness received an anonymous message one night. You were the woman I laughed at. Now, you're the one I hope to become someday. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Sheila's fall was never her victory. It was just a necessary echo of a story finally told right. Goodness folded her phone and stepped outside into the night air, smiling not out of pride, but from the quiet relief that she no longer had to look over her shoulder. Some battles, she realized, aren't won loudly. They're simply outlived. The garden lights outside the Haven house flickered softly as the evening settled. Goodness sat on the porch steps, sipping ginger tea, her body relaxed but her mind restless. Joseph joined her quietly, placing a warm shawl around her shoulders. "You've done something beautiful here," he said. She smiled, tilting her head to rest it against the railing. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes. Like I'm going to wake up and realize it was all a daydream I didn't deserve." Joseph turned to her, voice quiet but steady. "You deserve more than this. You've carried others, fought with dignity. And through it all, you never stopped giving, even when you were bleeding." She looked at him then, eyes glinting under the moonlight. "Why do you see me so clearly?" He chuckled softly. "Because I've watched you build a home without bricks, just truth, faith, and grit." A silence stretched between them, not heavy but tender. Joseph reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper crane. "I read somewhere that folding 1,000 paper cranes grants you a wish. I've only folded this one, but if it counts, I'd like to use it now." Goodness took it with a small laugh. "What would you wish for?" He met her gaze. "A chance to know you beyond the wounds. To love you gently, if you'll let me." The world stilled for a second. Her heartbeat picked up, not with fear, but recognition, of sincerity, of timing, of healing finally making space for possibility. "I don't have answers," she said slowly. "I'm still unlearning what I thought love was." Joseph nodded. "Then let me just walk beside you while you learn. No expectations, just presence." She looked at the crane, delicate in her palm, then back at him. "One step at a time," he smiled. "Always." And in that quiet moment beneath the stars, Goodness realized she no longer had to be strong alone. She could be soft too. She could be held. Spring arrived gently, painting the Haven house grounds with warmth and new color. Goodness stood in the backyard one morning, the soil cool under her fingers as she planted the last of the rose bushes. Each flower represented a woman's story, a reminder of survival, resilience, and the beauty that blooms after ruin. "That one's for Miriam," she whispered to herself. She left a decade-long abusive marriage and brought her 3 daughters here last week. Joseph came around the side with a wooden bench he'd crafted by hand. "Perfect spot for reflection," he said, setting it near the biggest blossom. "She'll love it." Goodness wiped her brow and stood beside him. "Every corner of this place holds more than furniture now. It holds healing." Her mother arrived moments later, dressed in a pale blue blouse, walking slower than usual, but with that same familiar light in her eyes. "You did it," she said, arms outstretched. "You really did." They embraced tightly, neither of them speaking for a full minute. "I was scared when you left him," her mother finally said. "Not because I didn't believe in you, but because I knew what society would try to make you believe about yourself." Goodness held her hand. "They almost succeeded, Mama. But I met me again. I liked her better this time." Her mother chuckled through watery eyes. "Then teach others to meet themselves, too." They walked together through the garden, pausing at each flower bed. "Do you remember when we couldn't even afford a proper home?" her mother asked. "We lived in a one-room flat with leaking ceilings. But you always said, 'One day I'll own something that doesn't leak.'" Goodness laughed. "I guess I fixed more than just the roof." Her mother smiled. "You fixed your name." As the sun rose higher, they sat on Joseph's bench, 3 generations of dreams, Goodness, her mother, and the soil beneath their feet, finally rooted where once they were scattered. The air was warm with promise as Joseph led Goodness into the now-finished foyer of the Haven house. On the entry table sat a velvet box, not the kind that shouts diamond engagement, but something simpler, quieter. "Before you panic," Joseph said with a smirk, "just open it." Inside was a silver ring engraved with a single phrase on the inside, "For the life you built." Goodness's throat tightened. "Joseph?" He stepped closer. "This isn't a proposal. Not yet. It's a tribute to your strength, to the house, to every silent day you survived without applause. You wear this only if you believe you've earned your own grace." She blinked fast. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could wear a symbol without it feeling like weight. He nodded. Then don't wear it for me. Wear it for her, the version of you who almost gave up. Slowly, she slid the ring onto her right hand. As it settled against her skin, a flood of emotions swept over her: grief, joy, relief, and a quiet kind of pride. No one's ever celebrated my survival like this, she said. You didn't just show up, you stayed through the rebuilding. Joseph smiled. Because you didn't need rescuing. You just needed someone who wouldn't flinch when the foundation cracked. They walked into the kitchen, where fresh tea brewed and gentle music played from a speaker by the window. I'm not sure I know what love looks like anymore, Goodness said softly. But I think I know what peace feels like. Joseph touched the side of her face. Then let's let peace teach us both. Outside, the house stood tall, not just a home, but a testament. And the woman who once doubted her worth now wore a ring, not on her wedding finger, but over the hand she used to rebuild everything she'd been told she had lost. It wasn't a new chapter, it was a new book. And she was writing every word. The bell above the agency's front door chimed softly as Goodness stepped in, clipboard in hand. But today she wasn't there for a viewing or a meeting. She was expecting someone from the past who had surprisingly requested a second chance. Sheila stood by the window, dressed modestly in slacks and a navy blouse, the shimmer gone from her once flashy appearance. She looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in energy. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she began, her voice lower, more restrained. Goodness walked past her calmly, placing a file on the desk. "You asked for an interview. Let's treat it like one." Sheila swallowed. "I'm not here to defend what I did. I was arrogant. I hurt you. I participated in something cruel." Goodness remained quiet, letting the words hang. "But I've spent months rebuilding. I took real estate courses. I've volunteered at shelters. I needed to learn the value of what I once mocked." Goodness finally sat, her hands folded. "Why here?" Sheila blinked. "Because this agency, this story, taught me more than any class ever could. I watched you rise when I expected you to fall. I want to be part of something that helps women stand again, even if I start at the bottom." The silence between them shifted. This wasn't a performance, it was a confession. Goodness leaned forward. "Then you'll shadow me for 3 months. No commissions. No titles. You'll learn the kind of agency that doesn't just sell homes, it protects dignity." Sheila nodded, visibly emotional. "Understood, and thank you." Goodness offered a faint smile. "Don't thank me yet. Just make sure the woman you become never builds anything on someone else's brokenness again." As Sheila left the room to begin onboarding with the admin team, Joseph peeked in from the hallway. "You sure about that one?" he asked. Goodness stared at the door. "I'm not sure about her," she said, "but I'm sure about who I've become. And this version of me doesn't fear restoration, even when it walks in wearing regret." The sun rose slowly behind the Haven house, casting soft gold across the sign newly mounted at the gate. A place for her to begin again. Inside, laughter and light footsteps echoed as women decorated the final room, now a group therapy space filled with plush chairs, art from survivors, and a shelf stocked with journals and candles. Today was the official launch, and Goodness wore white, not for tradition or attention, but as a symbol of starting anew. She stood in the middle of the main hall, clipboard in hand, heart steady. Guests began to arrive, supporters, donors, even former clients who had walked through the darkest parts of themselves and found peace beneath this very roof. Her mother stood near the refreshment table, proudly arranging flowers. Joseph approached with a proud grin, slipping an arm gently around her waist. "You're glowing," he said. "I don't think I've seen you this alive." She smiled, eyes reflecting years of survival. "Because for the first time I feel free and useful." As she stepped up to give her opening remarks, the room fell silent. "2 years ago, I walked away from a life that once defined me," she began. "I didn't leave with a plan. I left with a wound. But wounds, if treated right, become testimony. This house was once meant to be a symbol of failure, but we reclaimed it. And now it belongs to every woman who was ever told her voice was too soft, her story too messy, or her comeback too late." Applause swelled in waves. In the back of the room, a young woman quietly cried, her first day at the center, her first night away from fear. Goodness locked eyes with her, then placed her hand gently over her heart. Today, we don't just open a house, we open a door. To healing, to self-worth, to the beginning. When the ribbon was cut and the women stepped inside one by one, it wasn't grandeur that filled the space, it was hope. And as Goodness stood by the door, greeting them with open arms, she whispered one final truth to herself. I didn't just sell him a house. I bought myself a future. Here's the Bible verse, Isaiah 61 verse 7. Why it fits. This verse reflects Goodness's quiet transformation, from being discarded in shame to reclaiming her life, her home, and her voice. She didn't fight with bitterness, but walked in wisdom and grace. And in return, she not only regained what was lost, but gained more purpose, peace, and influence to help others. Moral of the story. You don't need to destroy others to rise. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is rising without them. True strength is not loud. It is steady, dignified, and healing in silence. Expanded moral. This story teaches us that healing isn't about proving a point. It's about protecting your peace. Betrayal may try to redefine you, but when you choose grace over vengeance and truth over pride, restoration finds you. Your scars can become the blueprint for someone else's survival. Never underestimate the quiet power of walking away and building something beautiful from the ruins. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.